Hi everyone. In this clip, what we're going to do is start refining our design just a little bit more. So we can see here, we've got our basic structure. We could start to play with this a little bit more. In fact, in this case, for example, this section here, I think I want to still be a little bit straighter. Now, one thing that you'll find is as you get higher and higher poly with this stuff, it's going to be harder and harder to kind of change those shapes and get them sort of aligned nicely. There's ways to do it, but they start to kind of get outside of the scope of what you need to do as a concept artist. So again, just a lot of small refinements in your shapes as I'm just moving these slightly. I keep the intensity of my Z intensity quite a bit lower, just that allows me to move things a little bit softer. So that's pretty decent here. I want to move this piece in just a little bit because I think it's going to make for a nice shape back there, but I might leave it for now. Again, these are the kind of things that you can start to play with, like figure out like, oh, is this an interesting shape here? Let's use our H polish. You can start to come in here and start to figure out if there's other kinds of shapes that we could use here that might be interesting in some way. And again, you can play with those, fiddle with them as much as you want, and start to adjust. What you'll notice here, though, is this part started to pop in a little bit too much. Now, this is something you're going to have happen a fair bit. What this is that as I brushed onto the other side, brush here, it starts to affect the other side that I'm working with. Now, there's some brushes that do this more than others. Clay buildup is one in particular. So as I do this, I actually start to push in the other side. That is because the brush is, basically it has a physical dimensionality to it. So as I do this here, it's going to start affecting the other side. If I go with a much smaller amount here, it's not going to reach. That usually happens if you're using bigger brushes and things like that. Now, the way you can turn that off is you can scroll over to your brush stroke area here and alt-click, and we'll see our brush settings. Now, there's a few things you can adjust in here, such as lazy mouse settings, which we'll get into later. We can change modifiers, curve modes, functions, and things like that. Now, one problem you run into here is that the stroke settings are for some stroke details. So when you're moving a stroke, what happens as you do that? There are also other modifiers that can happen on your brush. So we're going to alt-click our brush here itself, and we get a whole lot of other modifiers and adjustments. Knowing the difference between what's going to happen inside the stroke palette versus the brush palette will cause you frustration to no end because they seem like they will change the same things, but they don't. In this case, what we're looking for is auto masking. Scroll down here into this backface auto mask mode. Now, the number of times that I've ended up looking for this is innumerable. When I turn this on, when I start to brush with my clay buildup brush, you'll see that nothing gets changed on the other side. So that's great. That's exactly what I wanted in this case. Now, if I go back to my H polish brush and I start to brush now, what's going to happen is, let's just go like this. This side is still going to get affected because backface mask is still turned off. That is because it is per brush. So if I go back to my clay buildup brush, then again, backface mask is still turned on. So just keep that in mind. I have made an accessible option for that. When you press A and you get my quick brush mode, backface mask is right in here, easily accessible for you. So I use that very frequently, and it means that I do not need to pull these tabs open at any time to get access to, quick brush mask. So again, if I start to do this and I want to change that shape a bit more, maybe I pull this in and I look to the other side and I go, oh no, that's not what I wanted. Again, I'll just make sure that I press A, turn on backface mask, and start to push this back in so I could potentially make this interesting shape while not affecting the other side of what I'm working with here. So there you go. And again, if this is a shape that I don't like, let's just go back in time and undo that. If I wanted to actually duplicate this mesh, maybe to test it out once, I can just go in my subtool palette here just so we can see. If I press Control-Shift-D, what that's going to do is duplicate my geometry. So that'll be a quick option for you to be able to duplicate the mesh that you're working with inside your subtool, and we can simply hide the previous one that we were working with and start to make those adjustments. So we can start to try this different idea out. Maybe where we've got sort of this extra detail across the center here. Maybe start to build in an interesting kind of extra shape. I'm going to use my clay buildup brush here just to kind of block in this different kind of structure, similar to what our actual hammers or what our actual shovels would have based on our reference. And then we could use our damn standard to kind of block in some of these bigger ideas here, like where this part would potentially connect. We could also start using our move brush to start maybe integrating these two elements together in a more interesting way. How do these parts connect? So this is the kind of stuff that I really love to do inside of ZBrush because it gives me a lot of flexibility when trying to build those ideas in. Because now I can start to really just fiddle with this design, figure out if it's working, and manipulate it from there. Again, just kind of blocking in some of these details a little bit better. Let's get a clean line there. Maybe even a clean line out here. I could use my H-polish brush to kind of suggest that there's this extra detail here and block in all these various different parts. Even just start to H-polish in sections here and figure out how that looks. This is the bread and butter of trying to work inside of ZBrush, is blocking in interesting ideas really quickly. So I'm going to Alt-click this section here, which we haven't really dealt with yet. So in this section, I want to basically just Dynamesh this. So I do want to separate this from the other section here. So how do we do that? Because I don't want to necessarily Dynamesh this yet. Maybe I don't like it yet. Maybe I think it's dumb. Either way, I can start to separate these things out. So how do I do that? Well, one of the ways I can do it is, again, Control-Shift. The problem is I've got a different tool here. I actually want to mask these things out separate from each other. So if I click this again and find my Select Rectangle brush, what this will do is now, when I drag out with Control-Shift selected, then I can just select this. And whatever was in the green section will show and hide the other section. If I Control-Shift-click, it'll show back up. Now, if I Control-Shift-drag and then hold Alt, you'll see this turns red. If I click that now, what's going to happen is, when we've got both showing up, Alt will make the other piece disappear and have this only show up. This is also useful for figuring out, like, hey, this is actually a pretty interesting structure in comparison to what I had before. So again, you can kind of go in either direction with that because those tend to be really interesting to look at. So in this case, for example, this piece I want separated anyways on its own, so let's just view it by itself. Scroll on down here into Geometry, and actually into Subtool, and into Split. And we're going to go in here into Split Hidden, because we're going to be splitting our subtool into several parts. Split Hidden. And there we go. Now we've got our bottom handle here and our top little hilt. So that's pretty good. So now I can start working with this piece individually. If I wanted to access that option as well, I can scroll down with Shift-Q. This will give me my palette here. Split Hidden is one of my options here that I have access to as well, because I use it quite a bit. Now I could also use Mirror on the Y-axis to maybe change the orientation of this piece. I could maybe even start using my rotation here to start changing the shape of this element as well, because maybe I didn't like the direction that that was going. And again, I can kind of pull some of these parts in, change these general structural elements. If I'm losing the shape of one side compared to the other too much, then I can just go Control-Q, scroll down here into Mirror and Weld. We were using Mirror and Weld before, and so let's use it again. Boom. That'll just change that shape there, make this a lot more manageable. We could start to maybe smooth this out just a little bit to give us that shape that we want. And pull these parts together. And then again, this is just like a lot of pulling of simple shapes. It's again why I like to keep this as simple geometry. Now, if I wanted to still keep this geometry simple, but maybe keep it semi-hard edged, what I can do is go down into Geometry, go into Z-Remesher, and Z-Remesher is a tool that I could use in this case. And we will get into what that does in our next clip.